All right, so are you ready to dive into some high-stakes diplomacy and economic strategy?
Always.
I bet you are, especially today.
Good.
Today, we're going to unpack the career of Fumio Shimizu.
Okay.
This guy is really at the heart of Japan's engagement with Africa. We've got interviews, we've got policy documents, we've
Oh,
even got this surprising mention in a book about architectural drawings.
interesting. What kind of book is this?
It's just a book about architectural drawings.
Okay.
But the thing is with all this is that we're trying to answer one question.
Mhm.
Is Shimizu a genuine advocate for African development?
Right.
Or is he playing a more strategic game to advance Japan's own interests?
Well, you know, what's fascinating to me about Fumio Shimizu is his career trajectory.
Yeah.
He started as a lawyer, then he became a seasoned diplomat with assignments in France,
Oh, wow.
Afghanistan, Algeria, and now
Yeah.
the culmination is he is now Japan's first ambassador to the African Union.
Whoa. So he's basically a global player at this point.
Yeah.
All right, so let's kind of set the stage here. Japan's strategy in Africa seems to really revolve around this thing called TICAD,
Okay.
the Tokyo International Conference on African Development.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Well, what's unique about TICAD is that it emphasizes ownership and partnership with the countries involved.
I see.
It's not about Japan coming in and saying, we're going to tell you what to do or dictating the terms, but it's much more about collaborating with African nations
Okay.
so they can achieve goals that are beneficial to everyone.
So they're trying to find those win-win scenarios.
Exactly.
Got it. And it seems like Shimizu is really on board with this whole partnership narrative.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I was reading an interview with him
Right.
where he said,
Uh-huh.
if we want to change the world, we have to assure human security through economic development.
That's a great quote, and it really gets at the heart of Shimizu's thinking.
Yeah.
He's basically connecting economic development to human security,
Yeah.
which is interesting because it's not just about financial stability, but it's about having access to education,
Yeah.
healthcare, and a sense of well-being, too.
I see. So it's a much broader concept of development.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just about building factories. It's really about building a foundation for lasting peace and prosperity.
Okay, I see where he's going with that.
Mm.
It almost sounds like Japan is trying to position itself as this benevolent partner,
Mhm.
helping Africa to kind of rise on the global stage.
Right. And at the same time, I think they're making a very clear distinction between their approach and other approaches to development.
Really?
Like, for example, if you look at China's Belt and Road Initiative,
Yeah, the BRI.
which is also heavily investing in Africa,
Right.
it often comes with some pretty heavy strings attached. You know, you get these big loans that can lead to debt traps,
Right.
projects that mainly benefit Chinese companies. Japan wants to really be seen as a more ethical alternative.
Well, interesting. So Japan's investing in Africa, but they're trying to do it in a very different way. What does that actually look like on the ground, though? Like, what sectors are they focusing on?
Well, they're pretty heavily involved in education, infrastructure, technology transfer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's this program called the ABE Initiative.
No what?
The ABE Initiative. It's kind of funny that it's named after the former prime minister.
Okay.
But in this program, they provide master's degree training for African students in Japanese universities.
Wow. So they're really investing in people, in their education.
Yes.
What about the infrastructure side?
They're very big on quality infrastructure, seeing it as a key foundation for sustainable development.
Okay.
Think like reliable energy grids, really efficient transportation networks,
Yeah.
modern ports. You know, that sort of infrastructure can boost trade, attract foreign investment, and just generally make life better for everybody.
Okay. So they're building roads, bridges, maybe even some fancy high-speed rail lines.
Maybe, yeah.
But how does this all compare to the BRI? Is this a genuine attempt to do things differently, or is it just a PR move?
It's hard to say for sure, but honestly, I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, they are trying to differentiate themselves from China, but they're also facing some pretty big challenges at home.
Oh, right. Japan has that shrinking population.
Yep, and a stagnant economy, too.
Yeah.
They need to find new markets, they need new partners, and Africa represents a huge opportunity.
Ah, so there's that economic self-interest kind of peeking through the altruistic facade.
You got it. It's never as simple as it seems.
Right.
And that's what makes Shimizu such an interesting guy to study. He's at the forefront of this complex dance between competing interests.
Yeah.
And he's trying to find that balance between partnership and self-preservation.
Okay, so we've got Japan's overall strategy, their focus on partnership, their economic interests in Africa.
Yeah.
But let's zoom back in on Fumio Shimizu himself.
Okay.
I mean, he's been Japan's ambassador to the African Union since 2017, right?
Yes, that's right.
What has he actually accomplished in that role?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is his focus on security issues.
Oh, interesting.
He's been actively supporting peace-building efforts in Africa,
Right.
strengthening democratic institutions, and working really hard to counter terrorism and instability. He's really trying to make Japan a force for stability in the region.
So he's kind of playing the role of peacemaker. But I'm guessing always with that free and open Indo-Pacific agenda in the back of his mind.
Exactly.
By the way, what does that even mean? Free and open Indo-Pacific?
It's a big part of Japan's foreign policy. Basically, they want to make sure that there's freedom of navigation,
Okay.
open trade routes, and a balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region.
I see.
It's partly about promoting economic cooperation,
Right.
but it's also, an attempt to counter China's growing influence in the area.
Ah, so it's all part of that big geopolitical chess game.
Yep.
So it's not just about building bridges in Africa, it's about building alliances too.
Right.
But what about Shimizu's role in actually promoting economic development?
Yeah.
I mean, that's supposed to be Japan's big selling point, right?
He's very much pushing for economic diversification and industrialization in the region.
Okay.
He wants to help African countries to move beyond just relying on raw materials
I see.
and develop more self-sufficient economies. Things like manufacturing, technology, renewable energy.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of industries that can create jobs and really boost living standards.
Okay, so he's trying to make Africa less dependent on foreign aid and more self-sufficient.
Right.
But is that genuine altruism, or is it a clever way to create new markets for Japanese goods and services?
Well, again, I think it's probably a mix of both. I mean, Japan does have an interest in seeing Africa succeed.
Yeah.
A stable and prosperous Africa means more trading partners, more investment opportunities, and a more stable global economy overall.
Okay, so we're seeing this two-pronged approach, promoting stability and fostering economic growth. But before we get too deep into all the intricacies of international diplomacy, let's take a little detour.
Here.
Remember we were talking about that mention of Shimizu in a book about architectural drawings?
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
It turns out that he actually compiled and provided commentary for a book showcasing the work of British architects in the 1990s.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's a fascinating glimpse into his personal interests.
Right.
And it shows this side of him that you don't usually see in the world of diplomacy.
I guess so.
So maybe he's just a frustrated architect at heart.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just likes good design.
Yeah,
Either way, it does make you wonder about the man behind the diplomatic facade.
for sure.
What motivates him? What's his vision for the future?
Well, those are some great questions.
Oh.
And those are exactly the questions we'll be exploring as we dig deeper into the life and career of Fumio Shimizu.
All right, listeners, stay tuned, because we're about to go even deeper into Shimizu's background, his diplomatic style, and some of the controversies that have surrounded his career. Is he truly a champion for Africa, or is there something more going on? We'll find out together.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome back. Last time we were talking about how Japan has this growing interest in Africa,
Right.
especially through that ticket thing.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how Shimizu is playing this key role in all of it.
Yeah.
But we also started to notice some of those contradictions.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, is this guy truly about partnership, or is there something more self-serving going on?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to really answer it, I think we need to dig into Shimizu's diplomatic style.
Okay.
Like, what makes him tick as a negotiator? How
Yeah.
does he actually build relationships and influence outcomes?
Well, one interview I read described him as soft-spoken but persuasive.
Really?
It's kind of like a diplomatic ninja,
Oh, wow.
which is interesting because you don't usually think of lawyers as being very soft-spoken.
That's a good point, yeah. You're right. Diplomacy does often require a more subtle approach,
Yep.
especially when you're dealing with the kind of complex geopolitical dynamics you see in Africa.
Right. And there are definitely a lot of dynamics at play here. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got China's Belt and Road Initiative just expanding rapidly,
Right.
and Japan is clearly trying to carve out their own space.
Yeah, so Shimizu is walking a tightrope, you could say.
Uh-huh.
He's promoting Japan's interests.
Right.
But he's also emphasizing this cooperation and mutual benefit thing.
Okay.
It's a tough balancing act.
It really is, yeah. It's almost like he's playing a game of chess.
Right.
Every move is calculated to achieve this larger goal.
That's a great analogy, yeah. And in that game, Shimizu seems to be a master strategist.
Okay.
I mean, he navigates all these complex relationships, he builds trust, and he really finds those areas where everyone can win.
But remember we were talking about that controversy before.
Yeah,
Some people are skeptical about Japan's true motives in Africa.
right. There have been some criticisms for sure.
Yeah.
Some people say that Japan's just in it for the natural resources and new markets.
So some people are saying that it's just like neocolonialism disguised as development aid.
Well, that's a pretty strong accusation.
Yeah.
But it is true that a lot of African nations are worried about becoming too dependent on foreign investment, whether that investment comes from Japan or China.
Right. It's a valid concern.
It is.
It's about striking a balance between getting that investment and also protecting your own economic sovereignty.
Exactly. And that's why things like transparency and equitable partnerships are so important.
Well, speaking of transparency, I was wondering about that incident where China was protesting against Japan
Oh, right.
over those comments that were made during Biden's visit to Tokyo.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't Shimizu get summoned by the Chinese Foreign Ministry?
Yeah, he did. That was a pretty tense moment in the diplomatic world, no doubt. And it really brought those tensions between Japan and China out into the open.
Yeah.
Especially around those security issues in the Indo-Pacific.
So can you break it down for me? What exactly did Japan say that got China so upset?
Well, basically, Japan and the U.S. reaffirmed their commitment to cooperate on issues like Taiwan and the South China Sea,
Okay.
which are extremely sensitive topics for China.
Right, yeah.
You know, they see those areas as part of their own territory.
Right.
So any kind of interference is seen as a direct threat.
So basically, China saw this as Japan siding with the U.S. in a way that could threaten their interests.
That's pretty much it, yeah. And unfortunately, Shimizu got caught in the middle of that whole diplomatic firestorm.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you that even the best diplomats can't always smooth over these kinds of rivalries.
Yeah, it really shows you that Japan is in this tricky position, trying to stay close with the U.S., but also maintain a strong economic relationship with China.
Yeah, it's a really tough balancing act.
Well, I mean, except for that incident with China, Shimizu seems to be pretty good at it.
He does, yeah. And, you know, despite those criticisms and those diplomatic clashes, Shimizu actually has a pretty good reputation.
Yeah.
Among African diplomats, I mean, he's seen as a skilled negotiator, somebody who genuinely cares about Africa's development.
Okay.
And really believes in this whole partnership and collaboration thing.
Okay. So we've got this image of him as a pretty savvy diplomat, a strategic thinker.
Yeah.
Maybe even a bit of an art aficionado.
Right.
But to really understand Fumio Shimizu, I think we need to learn more about his past.
Okay.
Like what shaped his worldview.
Well, we know that he's a lawyer by training.
Okay.
And he's been working with the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1989.
So he's like a career diplomat through and through.
Yeah, pretty much. And his postings have taken him all over the place.
Where's he been?
He's been in France, Afghanistan, Algeria.
Wow, that's quite a range of experiences. You could say he's got a pretty diverse resume.
He does, yeah. I mean, all of those experiences must have had some influence on him. The way he sees different cultures and political systems and economic challenges.
Okay.
He definitely brings a pretty unique perspective to his job.
And, you know, right before his current job, he was the Deputy Director General of the Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau.
Okay.
And the Southwest Asian Affairs Department.
So he really understands that whole Indo-Pacific region.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is super important because Africa is becoming more and more of a focal point in the whole geopolitical competition.
Right, it's like the new frontier for all of that influence and investment.
Exactly. And Shimizu is right there in the middle of it, making sure Japan is a key player in Africa's future.
Okay, so we've got the diplomat, the strategist, the art enthusiast, the seasoned globetrotter.
Yeah.
But I'm still wondering about the man behind the curtain. Like, what are his personal values?
Right.
What drives him?
It's hard to say for sure. You know, diplomats tend to be very private people.
Yeah.
They're trained to represent their country's interests, not their own views.
Right.
But something must be fueling all of this passion for the work.
One thing we do know is that he's a big believer in human resource development.
Okay.
And education. He seems to see that as the key to economic growth and social progress.
Okay.
That seems to be a core part of his thinking.
And that kind of goes back to Japan's own post-war experience, rebuilding their country by really focusing on things like education and technology.
Exactly. It's like this belief that by investing in people
Right.
and fostering that international cooperation, you can build a more prosperous and stable world.
I like that.
Okay, so maybe that's the idealistic side of Shimizu we've been looking for.
Could be.
But we're still trying to figure out if he's truly a force for good or just a master manipulator.
Yeah, separating rhetoric from reality isn't easy.
It's not. To help us do that, I think we need to look at some actual examples of Fumio Shimizu in action.
Okay.
How has he used his diplomatic skills in real-world situations?
Yeah.
What are big wins? What are his setbacks?
Great questions, and those are exactly the questions we'll be tackling next time in part 3 of our deep dive into Fumio Shimizu.
All right, so welcome back to our final part of this deep dive into the world of Fumio Shimizu. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Japan's strategic interests in Africa, Shimizu's diplomatic style.
Right.
Even found that little tidbit about his passion for architecture.
It's been interesting, that's for sure.
But we still haven't answered that big question.
Mm-hmm.
Is he really a champion for Africa's development? Or is there something more to it?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? And to answer it, I think we really need to look at what he's done, what he's achieved,
Right.
the real impact he's had as Japan's ambassador to the African Union.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What are some of his concrete wins?
Well, one of his big achievements has been strengthening Japan's security cooperation with African nations.
Okay.
He's played a key role in things like peacekeeping, counterterrorism, and maritime security, especially in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, so he's busy building those alliances and really bolstering Japan's position.
Yeah.
But how does that actually benefit African countries?
Well, it's complicated because security and development are totally connected. I mean, you can't have prosperity without stability.
Right, of course.
So by working on those security threats,
Yeah.
Japan's creating a better environment for economic growth and investment in those countries.
Makes sense, yeah. It's like laying the groundwork. What about some specific development projects?
Oh, there are definitely examples.
Okay.
He's been a strong advocate for things like infrastructure, education, healthcare.
And this is where Japan tries to be different from China, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All that emphasis on quality and transparency and sustainability.
Exactly. Shimizu really stresses that it's about partnership and creating shared prosperity, not just about getting resources or quick wins.
But let's be real for a second. There are economic interests here, right? Japan's not just doing all of this just to be nice.
Of course, they have their own reason.
Right. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game.
Right. Everyone can win if it's done right.
Exactly.
So we've seen some good examples of his work, but I mean, every diplomat has challenges.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What were some of the big hurdles for him?
Well, just navigating the African political landscape is really tough.
Oh, I bet.
So many different interests, historical baggage,
Yeah.
all these different political systems and ideologies.
Oh, right.
And then, of course, you've got China.
Of course, China.
Their influence in Africa has just exploded in recent years.
Yeah.
So Japan's kind of playing catch up. It's a tough situation.
Yeah, so he's juggling a lot, building relationships with all these countries, but then also competing with China.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, he's got to keep Japan's interests in mind.
Right. And all within that unpredictable world of international relations.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of pressure. But after all of this, we're still trying to figure out if his work is genuine or if it's just about Japan's ambitions. Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, but I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
There's no question that Japan has their interests in Africa.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it can't also be about genuine partnership.
Right. It's complicated.
Exactly. It's not black and white. It's about recognizing those complexities, weighing the evidence, and forming your own conclusions.
Okay, so I think that about wraps it up for our deep dive into the world of Fumio Shimizu. We've looked at the facts, we've explored a lot of different perspectives, and I think we've really started to understand that mix of diplomacy, geopolitics, and economics.
And just like any good deep dive, I think we're left with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
Is Fumio Shimizu a visionary leader?
Right.
A shrewd operator?
Yeah.
Or maybe a little bit of both?
I guess we'll let our listeners decide that one. If you want to keep exploring this topic, all the sources we talked about are linked in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely check them out.
Dive in, see what you think.
Remember, in this world of power and perception,
that line between partnership and strategy can be pretty blurry.
Right.
It's up to all of us to stay informed and keep asking the tough questions.
Well said. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep those brains buzzing.